Hello, my name is Jeff Mann, and this video is going to be a quick introduction to deontology, or deontological ethics. This is going to be a very quick introduction to the topic, and I should also point out that there are different ways to explain and understand deontology, and this is mine. You may hear it differently from other people, but it's the same basic principle underlying all of them. So deontology is a theory of ethics, or an approach to ethical deliberation. When you're trying to figure out the right thing to do in the world, the morally right thing to do, you can take different approaches, and deontology is one of them. If you want something to write down to remember this, deontology is absolute moral rules. That's the three words that I like to start off with as a very basic definition to get you started with what it is. Absolute moral rules. Certain acts are inherently right or wrong. And so you identify actions that are right and actions that are wrong, and you try to do the right ones and not do the wrong ones. So this is to be distinguished from utilitarianism or consequentialism, where the consequences are what determines whether the action is right or not. In deontology, you're not interested in the consequences, you're interested in the action itself. For example, if you have the moral question on should you torture the terrorist to find out where the time bomb is, right? This classic ticking time bomb scenario. A utilitarian or consequentialist might say, yes, we should, because then we'll find the bomb and stop a whole bunch of innocent people from getting killed. Or a utilitarian might say, no, we shouldn't, because it's unlikely to work, and then we set a precedent for torture that is not a good thing to have in a society. A deontologist is much more likely to take an argument along the lines of, no, you shouldn't torture the terrorist because torturing people is wrong, right? That action is wrong. It doesn't matter if it achieves good or bad or indifferent consequences. The action is wrong, therefore you don't do that. The classic example of deontological ethics is Immanuel Kant and the categorical imperative. That's a whole nother video, and I've got one up there if you look for it, and we can talk about that later. But he is the classic example of the deontologist, Immanuel Kant, and his categorical imperative. It's a little involved to explain, so I'm not going to do that here. Some people limit deontology to Kant, but I don't think that is correct. We could also put notions of universal human rights here. The idea that all people have universal rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that this is not just something that a society created, it's not just a good idea. This is an absolute principle that all people, by virtue of being people, have these rights. We could place that under the category of deontology as well. I also place divine command under the category of deontology. So divine command or divine command ethics are the type of ethics where God told you what to do and what not to do, right? So in the Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you have a strong notion of this, where God, through the prophets and maybe apostles, has revealed these are the actions you should do, these are the actions you should not do because they're wrong. That's divine command ethics. Some people place them under deontology. I do, but you should be aware that some people do not. So other professors are going to say that they are not. So just be aware that there's disagreement in the field. Okay, now, when trying to understand deontology, there are benefits that go along with this. Deontology, in many cases, is very straightforward. It's often easy to understand. Do this action, don't do that action. And so very often it is an easy system of ethics to work with. Not always, but very often it's very straightforward, and that can be beneficial. Deontology, however, has challenges as well. And this doesn't mean there's anything wrong with deontology. Every ethical system has challenges. I think there's three big challenges that deontology has to deal with. One is it can be inflexible. So for example, there's the idea, the moral principle, do not lie, right? Lying is wrong. And so that might be a deontological principle. However, we can imagine situations where lying might seem like the right thing to do. If you're hiding Anne Frank from the Nazis and someone says, "Hey, are you hiding Anne Frank from the Nazis?" To say, "Okay, I won't lie, yes," doesn't seem like the morally right thing to do. And so one concern or challenge or problem with deontology is that these fixed rules can be inflexible. And sometimes we think we want to have some flexibility with our morality. The second big challenge is interpretation. What do these ethical rules mean? How do we apply them? And so sometimes they can be misinterpreted. So for example, among the 10 commandments, which are divine command for Jews and Christians, says, do not murder, but this often gets mistranslated and misinterpreted as do not kill. And that's a misinterpretation of that. And so interpretation can be a problem. Sometimes it's just an out and out misinterpretation, and sometimes people disagree, right? How do we apply the categorical imperative? How do we apply this moral rule? How does, we might say that when you get into the abortion debate, okay, we all agree you shouldn't murder people. That's wrong, but is abortion murder? And so how do we apply that to that situation? So interpretation can be a challenge when you're trying to apply deontological ethics. And the third challenge is the rule right? If we're dealing with absolute moral rules, universal rules that apply to all people at all time, are we sure that the rule is right? Was Kant right? Is the categorical imperative the rule that we should all follow? When we talk about universal human rights, are we sure that all of these rights are really absolute, universal? Do we have a universal right to work? Do we have a universal right to healthcare? And so there are questions. Some people will say, yes, this is true, and other people will disagree. And so do we know if the rule is right? When you're dealing with divine command, is the command really from God, right? And so for Jews, Christians, and Muslims, they're going to have to deal with the challenge sometimes. Is this command, this divine command, really from God? Is the rule right? So those three challenges are always going to come up when people are engaged in deontological ethics. Again, it's not to say there's something wrong with deontological ethics. All ethical theories have challenges that they need to deal with, and those are the three for deontology. So that is your super quick introduction to deontology. I hope that was helpful and didn't take too much of your time. If you have any questions, please let me know, leave me a comment, send me an email, and happy learning.